So my students and I had been teaching a course to help people understand how people learn and how to improve learning. And we were sitting outside on these very steps, and we asked each other, should we make a book about it? And so we decided we're going to do it, and we're going to make it fun so people will want to read it. And so we got a colleague, Neil Levine, who has done a lot of artwork for our technologies, and asked them to write characters for each of the chapters. There's a lot of creative ideas that are scientifically founded, and so we're trying to expose them to that so they have a bigger pantry of things that they can include in their instruction to make it more effective.
I'm using Dan's work in a couple of ways. One way is in education. I bring it into my classroom in teaching PhD students and postdocs about education and helping them develop their educational approaches. The second is in my research lab, where I continue to look at what does it mean to be an expert relative to a novice, and what are tools that we need to help novices become at least less novice-like and a little more expert-like.
I think being a teacher for a long time led to the style of research I do. So I taught in Los Angeles inner city for a year, and it was very successful. And then a job opened up in very remote Alaskan village. This is about 50 miles south of the Arctic Circle, no roads in or out. And this was like a dream opportunity for me because I like the outdoors, I like different cultures. So I ended up teaching there for 5 years. And then somewhere around the third year, microcomputers showed up. And from basic zeros and ones, I could create complete worlds. And so I kind of fell in love with it, and I used it to try and design new ways to teach the kids I was working with. All this work starts from an educator's perspective. It's all about how can you make people better in ways that they want. We start from there, and then we use those constraints to solve basic questions about how people learn and think. And ours is kind of unique in that we always want the students to enjoy it. Our leading goal is not that they get 100% correct. Our leading goal is they want to continue to do it and they make progress.
A faculty member put me in touch with Dan to do an honors project in education, bringing together the math background and the computer science with what Dan loves to do, which is to understand how people learn and what's hard about a concept, and like what do you really have to get people to understand about that concept. One of the qualities of this work is that it is about helping people develop strategies and dispositions that will serve them in the future. It's about how they'll approach a new situation, being able to help children develop these strategies, and maybe in ways that they actually recognize when they're useful in a new situation where they have to learn something. I think that's one of the ways that this could have an impact.
Dan's really special about the way he approaches the research. First, thinking of really the important broad issues in learning, but then in designing the studies and especially what he measures so that the interpretation of the result is much clearer and less ambiguous than most education research.
Dan approaches research from the standpoint of really caring about real problems, you know, in how do we improve in the long run and in the short run education. And so that really forms kind of the stimulus for him to develop rich questions that he then thoroughly, using rigorous methods, puts into classrooms to test.
So we're working on things like scientific inquiry, you know, what's a good way to reduce complexity in a strategy, but also more general things like teaching you to seek negative feedback. Because most people want praise, but constructive criticism is a lot better for learning than praise. Praise tends to tell you, you've done good enough, stop. Constructive criticism says, oh, there's places to improve. Kristen and I had an argument about this, and she corrected me. She pointed out that No, sometimes praise is really good, and not just for motivation, but it tells you which parts to keep and focus on. So you want both. But the question is, can we get students to seek both? Or do they only seek praise? Turns out this predicts a lot of their school performance.
What we've found is that in a situation where you could choose negative feedback or positive feedback, that those who chose more negative feedback learned more in the context that we were doing this study in. And so negative feedback seemed to lead to better learning, but there is that ego threat component of sometimes you just want to squash the negative feedback. And so we've been also working on some strategies there, both in terms of instruction to help people recognize the value of that constructive criticism and that it's not, it's not about you, it's about making what you're doing better.
It was a meeting with my colleagues where we were deciding on a grant proposal to the National Science Foundation. And a lot of people were proposing to make technologies that were smart and could teach kids. And I remember saying, hey, why do we make it so the kids teach the computer? And that way they can learn by teaching. And that was the beginning of Teachable Agents.
One of the things that Teachable Agents can do is keep a little bit of distance between you and the negative feedback. And so it's your agent getting the feedback. You want to help your agent. And so you're more receptive to taking in that information that can help you improve.
And so you teach your agent, and then your agent performs based on how well you taught it. And generally what it looks like is that the student tries to teach the computer about a content area, but the agent has a very structured interface, like a concept map, and the kid has to teach it with that map. And then, once the agent's been taught, it starts to reason by sort of highlighting where it's in the map and how it's thinking. We've compared learning this way to other things, and it always does quite well. And it seems to be particularly good for teaching children and maybe adults how to reason, because they're watching this agent reason correctly with their ideas. Kristen's a very good designer. She came up with a clapper. And so normally the way you teach negative numbers is by annihilation. I've got 5 negatives and 3 positives, and they meet and they annihilate, and I've got 2 negative Martians left. This misses symmetry around 0, which was the key. So Kristen designs these hands-on activities where there's these plastic blocks that snap, and they have little magnets, and the kids lay them down, and then there's this moment where they get to fold them and clap them together, and it really focuses them on the symmetry of the relationship. And it was brilliant, because it turns out it was the perceptual system's ability to understand symmetry that gives meaning to negative numbers. So my work is about helping people grow, and it's a close friend of research on development. And so sometimes we think of development as maturational processes that'll have a natural course unless something disrupts them, right? And if something disrupts them, then it's going to be very hard in the future. And so this is phenomenally important work. I sort of pick up after that and I say, now, what does it take to learn to be part of a culture? And so how can we get people to keep growing, but now it depends on learning, as opposed to just pure biological maturation or things that are universal, like mothers, right? And so we take that sort of nurturing approach to it. We think about how can we help these kids grow by learning things that are going to be important so they can learn the next thing, so they can be flexible, satisfied, and thrive in life.